Hello and welcome to Let's Examine Addiction Honestly podcast. My name is Charles. Today we will actually be going over tobacco, nicotine, and that sort of addiction, vapes included. Just kind of what I was able to find resource-wise, such as what are contained within these products, their effects on the body, and stuff like that. And then the next episode will actually be my own personal connection to this addiction. As always, please do not use this podcast as an alternative to proven medical methods such as AA, NA, therapy, rehab, or anything of the sort. So the biggest thing I was thinking about is smoking and how it relates to addiction. I smoked from the time I was 18 up until a few years ago. I smoked for nearly 16 years, which is absolutely insane, and it took me a long time to quit. It took a lot of attempts, but it also went hand in hand with my drinking, and especially got worse during my drinking. I could essentially go through an entire pack of cigarettes or like an entire vape while drinking, so it just shows how addictive nicotine truly is, especially with how easy it is to get. And I mean, if you think about it, one of the main things I think about when I think of AA is coffee and cigarettes. I think about people sitting around with a cup of coffee, having a cigarette, and talking about their addiction to alcohol. So I believe that's why tobacco is just such an easy addiction, because it's so readily available and has so many different varieties that it's just so easy to obtain and actually get hooked on. So what are cigarettes? Honestly, you'd think they're just the tobacco, the wrap, and the filter, unless you smoke unfiltered cigarettes, which I've known a few people to, but that is nowhere near the case. When I was looking it up, sources just varied wildly on what are in cigarettes, generally more or less the amount of chemicals. From what I could find, there are about 600 ingredients in cigarettes, and when burned, these cigarettes release upwards of 4,000 chemicals. And then sources range, but generally we're in the range of 40 to 70 different chemicals that are known to cause cancer, many of which are toxic. And these include things like acetone, which is a nail polish remover, ammonia, which is a cleaner, formaldehyde, which is like an embalming fluid, lead, obviously nicotine, tar. There were also some that talked about radioactive elements that were potentially in the tobacco. And some of these are actually naturally occurring in tobacco. It's not even all of these are added. Well, some are, especially such as tobacco-specific nitrosamines, I believe it's called. But this is added during the curing and processing of tobacco and is usually in the cigarette smoke itself. So it just goes to show how much is actually in tobacco and cigarette smoke that is absolutely hazardous to your health, even though you honestly wouldn't think that there would be that much with them sitting on a shelf in a gas station. They're so readily available. I mean, even with the warning, at least I wouldn't assume that there'd be that many different chemicals in them and that they'd be truly that toxic. But they've had a long history even, and I'm sure it's changed, and the chemicals in them have changed as well. Tobacco is thought to have been used first by Native Americans for things such as rituals, social ceremonies, and even communicate with the spirits. It was used via smoking, dipping, drinks, and other methods. And then when Europeans landed in America, it started to spread and was touted as a curative and was used medicinally for things such as asthma, earaches, bowel problems, which I can tell you, if you go for a while without dipping, you will not have any bowel problems after you start up again, especially if you don't do like pouches, because honestly it's a lot like coffee and it just helps you go, honestly. But it was also used for fevers, eye problems, depression, insect bites, burns, and just a ton of different things that doctors would prescribe it for. And it really increased dramatically during the 2 world wars, where cigarettes were given to the troops and used as like a currency for trading. It was even marketed towards women. If you've ever seen the old shows where they have the long-handled, like ivory little smoking devices to keep the cigarette away from them, it was even thought to be healthy at the time. But thankfully, scientists were able to link cigarettes to cancer, and the Surgeon general acknowledged this link in around 64 and then started requiring it on cigarettes in 1966, which overall ended up causing cigarette usage to decline after peaking at around 40% of the population. In which, if you've ever watched some shows and movies, things like Mallrats, I remember Silent Bob actually smoking in it, a lot of westerns, an outlaw Josie Wales, I remember him spitting the dip on the dog at the one part, and just how much tobacco was used in different shows compared to now. I mean, honestly, I almost can't tell you a show where I've recently seen something where they use nicotine or any tobacco products. I have played a game called RV There Yet, where you can chain smoke in it, which makes me laugh. But other than that, I honestly don't know too many games where you can actually see it. I mean, Fallout, you can collect packs of cigarettes, but you don't smoke them. So these bans moved to television and a bunch of other things where it limited the appeal. I mean, even things such as Disneyland, where they removed the cigarettes from Walt Disney statues. And this makes sense, honestly, due to all the health effects and just the amount of different negative health effects that cigarettes have. I mean, just in the short term, it does give you stimulation, a mild euphoria, relaxation, but then it leads into a spike in blood pressure and heart rate. It decreases blood flow to the fingers and toes, decreased skin temperature, obviously bad breath. Appetite is decreased, which makes sense because when you quit, you get that sweets craving. It causes things like dizziness, nausea, cramps, vomiting if you smoke too much, headaches, and coughing, which is, I always noticed it more when I first started smoking, when I took it back up, or in people I've seen smoke for a long time. And honestly, I never even knew you could actually overdose, and that from what I could find, about 60 milligrams of nicotine taken orally could actually be fatal in an adult, which is bonkers to me. I honestly did not know that you could overdose on it. Which, as your intake increased, you could feel faint, confusion, rapid decrease in blood pressure and breathing rate, seizures, and respiratory arrest, leading to the inability to actually breathe. And I mean, there are probably times where I had to have gotten close. I know one night when I was drinking heavily, I don't remember what had happened. I think I was having a super hard time and just ended up smoking 3 packs in one night, and the next day I just felt like garbage. But I honestly, even that was a few years ago, but I never would have guessed that I could have potentially overdosed on nicotine. So that never even came into the realm of possibility in my mind while smoking that much. And I think by now everybody knows about the long terms of smoking and nicotine use. I mean, the tar ends up coating your lungs, which can cause lung and throat cancer. You can get jaw cancer from dipping. You get increased risk of stroke and brain damage, eye degeneration and cataracts, a loss of sense of smell and taste, the yellowing of the teeth and fingernails, shortness of breath, coughing, bronchitis, different cancers, as I obviously stated earlier, emphysema, heart disease, COPD, infertility issues, impotence. It causes early menopause. There are just a massive amount of different things. It even ages your skin. I know from what I remember, I completely forgot to look it up for this, but I believe it also depletes your vitamin E. So you have to take like a supplement if you don't want that to be depleted, because that can cause its own health risks down the road. And the earlier you quit smoking, the earlier you can start to reverse some of these. While you're not going to be able to get back to pre-smoking levels, you can decrease all the risks of these. I know it goes down pretty drastically and pretty quickly, where you'll start reversing some of these effects that you have and the damage done to your body. And I think the reason I took up smoking so quickly upon turning 18 is just my connection to smoking. I mean, I've been around cigarettes and smoking since I was super young. I remember my stepmom smoking in the car and house. We even used to go down to Boone's store and we'd buy candy cigarettes and pretend to smoke them. So my dad or my grandpa would be, having some beers, and they had a John Deere tractor and a trailer. So we'd pull them down to that little gas station store, and candy cigarettes were like these chalky little sticks with a red tip. I know they're still around. They don't have the red tip anymore, and they're named something else, but it's still the same thing. And we'd pretend to like take puffs while eating them, which is a crazy thought that was actually a candy in the 90s and like 2000s, especially when like TV ads for some things were banned. But these candy cigarettes were openly sold to children. And I don't remember smoking in public in Michigan, especially in like restaurants or stuff. But from all the research I could find, Michigan started the ban in 2010. But that seems a lot more recent than I remember, because a lot of the other information I found said that bans on ads started in the 70s and that TV wouldn't play ads for them anymore. And this ban even doesn't truly include everything. You can actually still smoke in cigar bars, tobacco specialty stores, and gaming floors of some casinos. And when I was gambling in New York, I remember one entire part of the casino was actually a smoking section, and you could essentially see the haze from all the smokers, which is one of those things to keep them at the gaming tables and the slot machines to actually get them to continue smoking. And like I said earlier, I've seen mall rats a few times. There was smoking in there in the mall. I also remember like the Marlboro Man and what was his name? Joe Cool the Camel from Camel Cigarettes. If you ever want to watch a good movie, Thank You for Smoking is a really good one that goes over this whole topic essentially. It kind of goes over this along with a little humorous approach to it. It's definitely worth a good watch. I know I've seen it a few times, but even with all this information, smoking is just a very social activity. Most of the time when I see people smoking, especially if they're like drinking, it's usually when they smoke together. I know when I was in Iraq, one of my sergeants and I would actually smoke cigars out in the smoke pit, and then we just talk about life and everything. It's one of those things where it brings people together, even though it is such a bad habit. And prior to being 18, I never even considered smoking. I had never snuck one before. I didn't even consider it. It was just one of those things where I always found it to be a gross habit, and little did I know once I turned 18, I would be smoking for the next like 16 years. And I mean, getting to quitting, it was just one of those things where it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I tried all sorts of different methods. I tried like cold turkey. I tried gradually cutting down. I threw out multiple partial packs of cigarettes in hopes of quitting just to stop at the store or get a cigarette from other people. I never really got into the gum or toothpicks. I did switch to vapes there towards the end, and my usage actually ramped up because it just never felt like smoking. And then the nicotine increase was so drastic that I just needed more nicotine to fuel that. But there towards the end, like smoking like cigarettes themselves just made me like sick. So I switched over to vape and then just eventually got tired of that, and thankfully was able to just quit cold turkey. I honestly don't know how I did it there at the end. I didn't use any medications. Honestly, I've tried to avoid a lot of triggers such as smoking areas, hanging out with people who are smoking, parties. Oddly enough, I have not had too many cravings while drinking. I know you can also use nicotine patches, hypnotherapy, acupuncture as some of the other methods to try to use. Lozenges, nose sprays. I know psychedelics are one that are being researched. I found a few methods on those. I've heard a few things about it, but I've also heard not to try switching to like lower nicotine or tar cigarettes. Make sure you always use filters. Don't smoke unfiltered. Don't switch to another method, like I said, for vapes. And once you are trying to quit, be prepared for like feeling depressed, anxious, irritable, restless, hungry. You'll have like poor concentration, sleep. You will have those cravings. I think one of my friends, when I was in the army, said it's up to like 3 years you'll have really bad cravings. You'll feel sick, headaches. The sugar cravings, I definitely got a lot of those once I quit. So I'm on that topic. What methods have you used? Are there any methods? What's the oddest you've tried? The most effective? The worst? You can send me an email with that information. Let me know and I can share it in future episodes. You can send that to the Let's Examine Addiction Honestly podcast. Good Lord. Not that. The Let's Examine Addiction Honestly at gmail.com or theleahpodcast at gmail.com. And I'll share those in a future episode. I can do another episode when I get a few different items in, so we could actually give a few different methods, and Even stories, if you got stories about smoking, please send those in. Smoking is super addictive and dangerous. If you aren't smoking, please, please, please do not ever try it. It's not worth it. I smoked for years and the shortness of breath is horrible. Just the way my body feels, like, honestly, I never gained anything out of it. It's such a horrible habit. It's dangerous, especially how easily available it is. And while businesses are starting to put bans on them, it's still so easy, especially with the introduction of vapes. It makes it so much easier to get hooked so much harder. Increase your nicotine so much. And do I regret smoking? Of course. Am I going to dwell on it? Not really. There's nothing I can do. I got to focus on not smoking anymore, making sure I don't backslide, staying vigilant. But I do want to thank you so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this podcast and finding out a few of the things. I just wanted to go over it. In the next one, I'm going to go over my connection a little bit more, which should be a little more enjoyable than this information, because honestly, this is relatively basic information, but stuff I honestly did not know. So please like, subscribe, and share. Send anything in, as I said, to theleahpodcast@gmail.com or letsexamineaddictionhonestly@gmail.com. Please have a wonderful rest of your day, and remember, the person you are today is not the person you have to be tomorrow.